Welcome to the NNBN podcast, talking with businesses, charities and organisations across Northamptonshire.
Sponsored by Poppy Design Studio. Find us at poppydesignstudio.com.
The NNBN Awards are now open for entry until 30th of June, recognising achievements of Northamptonshire's businesses, charities, individuals and organisations. Visit nnbnawards.co.uk to enter today.
So welcome to another podcast, and it's great to be here. It's Simon here. You haven't got Marie. She leaves all this to me, but we know at the end of the day she's the brains behind the whole business, don't we? But there we go. This is my chance to express myself, get a chance to talk to people locally about what's going on, help them get their message out there, and I thoroughly enjoy it as well. So if you would like to be here on the podcast channel, please do get in contact with us. hello@nnbn.co.uk, or maybe pick up the phone and call us 01536 6483 83, and we'll get you on the podcast and talk to you about what you get up to. So today on the podcast we're talking conveyancing with Wilson Browne Solicitors, and I've got Jenny Woodruff and Kiran Gill with me today. Jenny, welcome. Kiran, welcome. Jenny, do you want to give us an introduction to yourself about what you get up to and what your role is at Wilson Browne?
Yeah, of course. So I'm a partner at Wilson Browne. I'm the head of conveyancing. What do I get to? I look after a large team across 6 offices. We've got a conveyancing presence in every office, so there's a lot to do and a lot of people to look after. But generally speaking, I just oversee everything that goes on, from our compliance to our processes, procedures, dealing with complex matters. That's kind of me.
This is residential conveyancing team you're talking about here.
Yes, residential conveyancing, so helping people move home, buying, selling, remortgaging, maybe transferring equity in the property, equity release, all sorts of things are involved. So
brilliant. And I'm right in thinking that you've been doing what you've been doing for a good few years, is that right?
Yes, too many years probably. It's probably been, how long have I been doing conveyancing? Probably about 25 years. So not always at partner level, but I've got lots of experience, right from the very beginning all the way to what I do now. So I hope that gives me a good understanding of how we do it and what we do.
Yeah, brilliant. And Kiran, you're a trainee solicitor that's joined the conveyancing team. Do you want to give us an introduction to yourself as well?
Yeah, of course. So I'm a trainee solicitor at the moment, and I'm in my first seat, which is in residential conveyancing. But prior to that, I was actually a paralegal in residential conveyancing for about 2 years with Wilson Browne. And I got into it because I did the sort of the standard route as to becoming a trainee, where I did my law degree first, and then I did the LPC, which obviously is being phased out now, but it's that way to go into it. And I really enjoyed doing property law whilst I was studying that. And so when it came to sort of going into the workforce, I was like, I really want to try that, go for that. And obviously Wilson Browne is a local firm to me. And I sort of beelined for there and was like, I'm going to apply for there. Really want to go into the residential conveyancing team. Obviously met Jenny and managed to get started here. And as I say, I've been doing it for about 2 years now. And I'm based in the Northampton office. And we deal with everything in that sense that Jenny mentioned. But we tend to have quite a bit of leasehold and new builds and things like that as well. But yeah, so we do a wide range of things over here in Northampton as well.
Brilliant. Well, welcome today. Jenny, let's come back to you. Let's talk about this word conveyancing, because it's quite a big word, but it actually can mean quite a bit, I'd imagine, can't it, when you're looking to move home?
Yeah, I mean, conveyancing is really just the term that's used to, how we transfer legal title in property. So, if somebody is buying a home, you want to make sure that the seller transfers their legal interest and ownership to the buyer. And that's essentially all it is. It's kind of a wide term that catches people selling a home and buying a home, and just making sure the legal side of things are done properly to avoid any issues later. So conveyancing is a bit of a catch-all for the legal aspects of property related transactions, I guess.
Is this for first-time buyers, or is it mainly when it's someone looking to move up the chain from moving a house, where they bought a house or bought property and then they want to move on to new property?
It's for everybody. I mean, obviously, conveyancing covers everybody. I mean, the main thing we do is the sale and purchase of property, and that could be for a first-time buyer just buying their very first home, to somebody downsizing, or like you say, upsizing, just buying a bigger home. So yeah, that's the main part of it.
Brilliant. And when it comes to people buying houses, I mean, obviously people go to the estate agent and then they work with yourselves to actually handle that process. Is that how it all works?
Yeah, I mean, if somebody's looking to buy a home, I mean, particularly if you're first time buyers, probably your first port of call is your mortgage advisor, just to find out what you can afford, because it's probably pointless going to view property until you know what your budget is. So that's a good place to start. And then obviously speaking with the estate agents, getting yourself registered with the estate agents, so that if anything that might interest you comes up, they can let you know. And also, people are always on Rightmove. Rightmove's quite addictive. You can set up property alerts on Rightmove as well. So if you're interested in a particular area, it will alert you if a new property comes up for sale. So that's the first thing you would do. I mean, similarly, if you already have a home and you're selling, again, you're probably going to want to work out in terms of your affordability what you can afford to take the next step, but also having a word with an estate agent to see what your property is realistically worth and what you can expect to get for it, because that's obviously part and parcel of what you can afford to buy next.
Now, moving home is quite a stressful time. I've done it many times myself, and I know what it's like when you're looking to buy a house, and things can slightly get delayed sometimes. How does that affect yourselves and sort of the whole process when those delays do occur?
I think delays are an interesting subject, actually, because I think if you ask anybody what their frustration with is in moving home, it's normally delays. And I think there's a misunderstanding in terms of that it's the fault of one person or another, or it's the conveyancer. But actually, there's so many external factors that affect how quickly a transaction will go through. If you're in a chain, if you imagine, you've got 6 transactions, some person's sold, somebody's buying that, and it goes on and on and on. Unless somebody can break the chain and afford to purchase independently of selling their home, which is not likely, then everyone's got to tie that in together. So you can imagine all of those transactions going on, trying to agree the dates. You've then got thrown into the mix how long the mortgage offer takes to come through. There might be issues, title issues, when someone's investigating title to a property. Things might come up that need to be resolved, can cause delays. You might simply just have people being difficult in terms of moving days, particularly again if you're in a chain. So I think there's so many different aspects to it, and what I would say to everybody, if they are frustrated with delays, it is annoying, but it's an awful lot of money you're spending to buy a house. It's the most money you're going to spend on anything, and actually take your time to get it right. So whilst it's frustrating and you want to get in, it's better that it's right.
Absolutely, you're right there. It is an expensive purchase, and sometimes for some people, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think, ultimately, it is about getting it right. And I suppose some of the delays will come around various reasons that you just mentioned, but also the frustration comes when people have taken time out, or they've got boxes packed and they want to move and just get going into the new property, and then the delay happens. But how often do you sort of see delays? Does it happen quite often, or is it pretty much just as and when, case by case sort of thing?
I think it is very much case by case. I mean, like I say, if you're in a chain, you're more likely to experience not necessarily a delay, but it's probably going to take a little bit longer than you might want it to. We see some transactions go through in a matter of weeks. Some can take 3 to 6 months. It just very much depends. I mean, the other thing, if maybe you're buying from an estate. If somebody's died, you might be having to wait for the grant of probate to come through. So there might be other legal things going on. And I think it was interesting what you said about packing up your boxes and things. That's always a controversial thing, because it's not binding until exchange of contracts has happened. That completion date can be changed. The transaction's not binding, and it's such a difficult balance when clients are desperate to book their removals, and you're sort of saying, well, we don't know for sure if this is going to happen. We think it is, and that can be very tricky to balance. I feel for clients in that situation, but there's no real way around that, because until exchange has happened, anything can happen, really.
I think another one that
Sorry, Kiran, start that again.
I was just going to say another thing that we've found also can cause not necessarily delays during a transaction, but something that can sort of crop up issues and things can be when obviously a buyer gets a survey done. A lot of the time we would recommend, it's really good to get a survey done. As we said, obviously it's the most expensive thing you're ever going to buy. It's good to make sure there's sort of no creeping issues there or anything that might crop up later that you need to look into. And the thing with obviously getting a survey done is that is completely the buyer's responsibility. The agent can sometimes sort of recommend where to go and things like that, recommend some surveyors, but the general sort of home buyer survey that you can get done will obviously, take time to get that booked into the property. They'll then obviously generate their report, which will then get fed to the prospective buyer, and then it could come up with some things in there, and then obviously we sometimes get that then fed back to us, and then we've got to sort of ask some more questions and sort of see if those kind of things can be resolved as well. And sometimes, depending on when the survey takes place, if it's sort of towards the beginning it can be better. If it's sort of towards the middle, it's still okay. Sometimes when it comes up more towards the end, other legal issues might have been sort of sorted at that point, but then some things sort of crop up with that, which then obviously need to then be dealt with separately as well. And I know that is one thing that I think most people tend to get a survey done. As we say, it's quite important to do, and that can be something that does show potentially issues. It can also show the good parts, obviously, about a property as well, but there are sometimes little things that crop up in there.
Yeah, thanks for highlighting that, and the survey, without a doubt. I know when I've moved home before, it's always alerted things, and I think it just gives us more information to what we're either dealing with at the end of the day as the buyer and the seller, doesn't it? So, Jenny, go back to your question about, or the point you were making a minute ago about the length of time. Some of it can take a couple of weeks to get through, and then sometimes it's a little bit longer, is it?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple of weeks is maybe ambitious, but it can. I mean, it depends on your buyer. If you've got a cash buyer, so they're not having a mortgage, they might say to you, we don't want to have the normal searches carried out. We just want to go ahead. We can turn that around quickly, but we would always recommend that a client does have searches carried out because, like I said before, it's an expensive purchase. It could be really expensive if you find out subsequently something that, had you taken your time, you would have known. So it does depend on the circumstances, very much so. And I think picking up on what Kiran said about survey is so true. We always recommend a survey because the seller actually isn't under any obligation to reveal physical defects in the property. There's an old principle, caveat emptor, which is buyer beware, basically. So you go away and you do your investigations before you commit yourself to purchase the property.
Brilliant. Thanks for highlighting that as well, because as you say, it's an expensive purchase, and the least mistakes that can happen. No one wants mistakes, do we? We want to just get on with it. But going back to the bit about packing the boxes up though, and the stress that's involved with moving. I mean, some of the challenges I've found is you've been ready to go, and then someone's stalled slightly, and it can get a little bit challenging. But hopefully, you don't see too much of it.
We do and we don't. It is frustrating. I think. You highlighting it is stressful. It is so stressful because if you imagine, we really understand this. This is upheaval. This is your home. This is where you live. There's nothing more unsettling than not being able to come home and just be calm. And when you're all up in the air and you can't find anything, and it is frustrating. And I think you've just got to manage your own expectations about that. And what we see some people do is they will instruct us and they go, "We've agreed a completion date with the seller of." The 20th of March or something. And we just have to say, you can't agree that now. There's so much that can happen. Yes, of course, we can aim for that date, but it's just being realistic with your expectations. If you can do that and bring yourself back into check, if you like, it will be less stressful. And, maybe even opting to move on a Monday or midweek or something, maybe not on a Friday when everyone wants to move because they've got the weekend. It's normally the busiest day for removal firms. So you might find yourself with a little bit more flexibility if you maybe choose a midweek day or something to do it. And also if something goes wrong, which hopefully it won't, you've got another working day the next day to sort those things out rather than it being the whole weekend and everywhere's shut. So
that's a good point. That's a really good point, actually. Never thought of that. I think I moved on a Friday, thinking about it now. So, actually moving on a Monday or having the Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and then you have got the Tuesday onwards where places are, services are open to actually come and sort those problems. Good idea, good advice there as well. So, Jenny, let me come stay with you again. Talking about people that are looking to sell their house for the first time, what sort of advice would you give them around sort of the process that you can offer?
Selling their house. Sorry, you just broke up a little bit then. If they're selling for the first time.
Yes.
Yeah. So selling for the first time. So like I said, I think your estate agent is going to be your first port of call because you want to establish what your property is worth and what you're likely to receive from it in terms of a price. I think depending on what you're doing, if you're moving on, then you might want to have a word with a mortgage advisor as well to see how much you can borrow so you know what you're looking at. I'm not an expert in terms of selling property by any means from that point of view. That's more an estate agent. But what a lot of agents say to me, even when I've been, trying to sell my own home, is so many people wait until they see a house they want before they put their house on the market. And you're almost setting yourself up for a bit of disappointment there, because by the time you've gone through the steps on getting it to market, that house might have gone. So if you decide you want to move, perhaps make that decision, get your house on the market and then start to look, or once you've got an offer, start to look. Because there's nothing more frustrating. You see the house you want, it's gone, and then the next one's gone. And so getting prepared to take those steps. Things have changed recently as well in terms of the information that has to be provided at the outset of a sale. So agents are under an obligation now to provide more information about a property in terms of, any financial obligations, things like ground rent, service charges, council tax banding, whether it's freehold, leasehold. Buyers, will be sort of able to see more information about a property, any potential legal issues. And that's something that we can help with as sort of conveyancers early on, even before your property is sold. If you're thinking of marketing it, we can sort of put together like a pre-sale pack, if you like, that can tackle those issues head on. And the whole purpose of this is for more sort of transparency at the beginning, but also one thing in conveyancing is there's a lot of back and forth of inquiries between the lawyers. Some of those things, it's argued, could perhaps be ironed out quicker if that information was there at the beginning. So that's quite a new process, and we're sort of seeing how that's going to play out. But I think definitely if you're about to sell, have a chat with an estate agent. Even call the solicitor, ask for recommendations. You could do that as well. So just to help you if you're not sure.
Kiran, you mentioned right at the beginning that you were in the Northampton office. Do you sort of cover the whole sort of Northampton area within your role at Wilson Browne, or do you sort of cover a little bit further afield?
We do mostly deal with local properties. Obviously, Northampton has lots of little areas surrounding it and everything like that. And we mostly do have local properties that we act for, obviously the buying or the selling. But we do tend to branch out a little bit as well. So we've got an existing client maybe from before who maybe they're selling in Northampton and moving elsewhere, or if they're, moving back to Northampton, we can also act on that. We do act on transactions sort of countrywide, but it just depends on, how they find us as a firm. But most of the time, as I say, it is generally local. I'd say a good proportion of everything that we do is Northampton based, or the surrounding areas, Northamptonshire as a whole in general.
Yeah, Jenny, you're based at the Kettering office, I believe, aren't you?
I'm sort of everywhere. So because I look after all of the teams, I'm not really based anywhere. It's kind of wherever I am on that particular day. My actual desk is in Northampton, actually, but I'm not sat at it very often, which is great because I get, to see everybody frequently. So that's good.
Brilliant. Okay. I'm going to edit this bit out, but is there anything else you want me to add in at this point? Just that we can, anything else, messages that you want to get over, Jenny, at all?
Kieran, do you think it's worth talking about source of funds?
I was going to say that I did have a thing about potentially about the buyers having like collated all of their information at the beginning. It can be really handy just because obviously brokers, solicitors and estate agents all ask for it. So we could potentially talk about it.
So the question is, what makes the process easier for yourselves, is it, or the whole process easier?
I mean, maybe you could say, going back to how can a buyer help themselves, or a seller sort of, probably a buyer, because then we can discuss the source of funds and those things. How can a buyer, we've talked about sellers, haven't we? How can they help themselves in getting the transaction off to a good start?
Okay. Let's do that. Let's just give it a couple of seconds pause because I know when to edit this. Just helps me off. So we talked about the selling houses, but when it comes to buying houses, how can the process be made, easier for the buyers when it comes to actually buying a property?
So in terms of buying, I mean, I think, as we said again, going to see your mortgage advisor once you've got there, making sure that you respond quickly to your conveyancer, filling out those initial forms. There's a lot of forms at the beginning. We're really sorry about that, but that is how it is. We need to collate. That's how we take our instructions for the transaction. We need a lot of information. And I think one of the key things that we find can cause delays with buyers is we're under an obligation to undertake checks on the source of the buyer's funds. So have they got the money in their name, and also how did they get it? And those questions can feel quite intrusive, I think, but we need that information. Even if you've provided it to your mortgage advisor or your lender previously, we need to have that information. So if buyers can collate that information, get it ready, their bank statements, I'll perhaps go over to Kiran and let her talk a little bit about gifted deposits, because that's another arm to that. But actually, just having that information early and being transparent with it at the beginning is really important, and getting your forms back and making sure you can complete them as thoroughly as you can. I mean, Kiran, do you want to talk a little bit about gifted deposits? Because I know you see quite a lot of that in your role.
Yes, of course. So in terms of, as Jenny mentioned, obviously we have to carry out a certain amount of checks and things like that, sort of from a regulatory basis. And it's everything that applies to our initial client will then also apply to someone who is giving a gifted deposit. If it's a parent, a family member, or a close friend, they will be under the same. We'll have to conduct our ID checks. We'll have to see how those funds have been accumulated and how they've got those together over, however many sort of months or years that they've got that together. And that's why it can be really good to know, as a buyer, have a nice overview of exactly how you'll be funding the property, whether that's made up of obviously partly from a mortgage, partly from maybe a gifted deposit that's coming from your parents. And it's really good to know as well whether it's already with you from your parents or whether they'll be giving it at a later stage. Things like that can be really useful for us so that we know exactly where the money's coming from, and it can really help us then put together that picture of exactly where the funds are coming from. If it's, for example, we have obviously a lot of lifetime ISAs, help to buy ISAs, as we say, gifted deposits, and things like that. It's really good to have a good picture of exactly where that's coming from. And if we then know, right, this much money is coming from your parents, we can then ask, we'll need this amount of details from yourself and then from your parents to then be able to get that overall picture and sort of check that one off.
Another key important topic there as well, and subject to mention, because obviously some people do get inheritance, don't they, to be able to, find that deposit.
Yeah, they do. And I think as we talk, I saw a report somewhere that said that conveyancers probably have double the workload they did now than they did 20 years ago, because we've got all these other things in the mix now. And as we start to talk through this, you see why this transaction can take a long time because there's so many different elements to it. You know, the funding, the survey, the searches, the legal inquiries, so many things going on. And, you know, we have to consider other things like environmental risks now, and climate change is something else, you know, fraud, anti-money laundering. You know, there's an awful lot surrounding a conveyancing transaction that we have to think about now. So, yeah, it's easy to see why it is, you know, it's not a 2-week process, generally speaking. It does take slightly longer.
I think 2 weeks was a bit of an exaggeration by me earlier, but it'd be nice if it was that quick. But we know it doesn't. It's not as quick as that. So but brilliant. Listen, Kiran, Jenny, thank you for joining us. Jenny, where can people find out more information about the services that you offer and get in contact with you if they want to get in contact with you?
So they can call me on all the numbers and everything on our website. We have a dedicated page to conveyancing. They can have a look at the team, and obviously all of the different offices are listed there as well, whichever is more convenient for them.
Brilliant. And that's wilsonbrowne.co.uk. So it's Wilson and then Brown with an E on the end before the .co.uk. But yeah, thanks for joining us. Great to catch up with you both and to speak to you about conveyancing, because as I said, I think some people don't necessarily understand everything that's involved, and obviously that's why you're here. So thanks ever so much for your time, and keep up the good work.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you.